Hi, my name is Christopher Stackpole. The country that I chose is Turkey, and let's get right into it. So the big question that I'll be answering is the history of the game industry in Turkey, and I'll be getting into some of the smaller sub-questions like when did it start, when did it boom, what's its size throughout history in the modern day, that kind of thing. So let's get right into it. The video game history of Turkey begins in the early 1980s, when the national yearly income was around $1,000. Very few people could actually afford to buy home consoles. Only the rich could. However, to escape from the societal and political pressures in Turkey at that time, there were many people, especially children, who were drawn to the prospect of digital gaming. And so this led to the creation of a thing called Atari Solonu. I think it's how you say it. You'll have to forgive my pronunciation. And this roughly translates to Atari halls in English. They're very similar in concept to arcades, where you just have rows on rows on rows of machines. And so you saw many children staying up until midnight or even later playing Atari games in cigarette-filled smoke halls. Not a great environment. And this has created a, I think, really interesting prejudice against the Atari brand name in Turkey that lasts even until this day. There's still people that hate Atari. So by the mid-1980s, there were cheaper consoles that brought home gaming into the homes of people. However, besides simple games like tic-tac-toe, the only real attempt at making a Turkish game was one called, forgive my pronunciation again, Kaloglan, I think is how you say it, which featured a famous hero from Turkish fable. And typical sales for box games around this time were 300 copies for the good titles. And I just want you to think about how few that is. 300 titles. Now we've got companies selling millions, hundreds of millions of copies. So yeah, very small industry at this time. So then by the 1990s, the Amiga 500 made game development much easier for Turkish studios, and it brought the first successful Turkish games. So one of the first kind of semi-major games that we see come from this area is this one called Hanser, which translates to the dagger. And Hanser sold 2,200 copies at a price of $15 per copy and about $7 to produce each copy. So certainly a big step up from 5-10 years prior, but by no means was it enticing to capital owners, investors, that kind of thing. Two of the other major players we see at this time is a company called Silicon Wax, another company called CompuFiliax, I think is how you say that. Strange name. And they collaborated on a game called Legends of Istanbul Tulip Warriors, which was by far the biggest game of this time, definitely the most successful. And one of the really neat things about it is they worked with a leading music industry company, and they actually got this published on CD-ROM technology, which was revolutionary for Turkey at the time. No one else could do that. And using this method, they managed to distribute about 47,000 copies of their game. By far the biggest game of history. I mean, that's 20 times more than, games of the decade prior. However, even with this, they only managed to pull in a net profit of $10,000. So still not a large industry, not very enticing to people. By the 2000s, a Turkish developer who had been living in the UK and was very successful in the UK, he actually worked on Street Racer, came back. His name was Melvit Dink, I think is how you say it. And Dink started a company in Turkey where he was dedicated to working with local talent. And within a year of him coming back, they released Turkey's first ever international game, which is really cool. And it was written entirely by university students, which I think is even cooler because, I'm a university student. And so this game was called Dual Blades and was quite large, pretty successful. However, the current biggest game that's come from Dink's company, because he's continued working throughout the years, is one called Istanbul. It was published in the early 2000s, and it's an MMORPG that takes place in, you guessed it, Istanbul. A lot of games about Istanbul, I'm noticing. So in present day, the industry is quite large. In 2015, it had a market share of $464 million significantly bigger than it, had been in the decades prior. And by 2021, the market statistics reached a staggering $1.2 billion. So that's crazy, 3x the size in just 6 years. However, half of this 1.2 billion came from mobile games. And so currently, Turkey is the 18th biggest video game market in the world in terms of, industry size. And major games to come from Turkish studios are, this all comes from one company, PEC Studios, Toy Blast, their first game, Toon Blast, which I've actually heard of, their biggest game, and a couple others. And this is a perfect demonstration of the size of mobile games in Turkey. They're just huge. A lot of the biggest games to come from Turkey are mobile games. In fact, PEC Studios was the third largest grossing European online game company, with 350 million users reached worldwide in 2018. One of the other big series to come out of Turkey is the Mountain Blade series, which is personally one of my favorites and what got me to do Turkey as my country, which was made by a company called Tail Worlds Entertainment.